No good deed goes unpunished. You guys came early, and I put the boring stuff up front, expecting people to sneak in later. Just to give you guys some quick background about myself, I'm still relatively new to Rackspace. Before coming here, I worked for a video game company called Square Enix, where I managed the cloud and infrastructure. So if you play video games, typically the MMO type stuff, that was my group. We did Final Fantasy 14 and then all the mobile apps. And for the record, all the problems with it happened after my watch. Um, what I want to really talk to you guys about today is essentially how we there at Square Enix adopted cloud and why we went hybrid cloud, what we had to learn to do it, and how it made our business better. So I'm going to give you all the obligatory, Rackspace overview slide really quickly here. This is the only slide I'll give you a commercial about Rackspace. In a nutshell, we are the company that partnered up with NASA, and we came out and started the Openstack project, which is the open cloud compute project, right? It's the biggest one out there right now. And I'll back that up in a little bit later on in my presentation. Moving on, this is my agenda. Basically, I want to talk to you guys about why we need to transform IT, what the developers want to see from us in IT. Remember, I came from an IT background. Hopefully, if you're a developer in here, I'm going to give you perspective on what it is that IT, how we see the world, because there's a huge disconnect between those two worlds, and then talk about how we found the balance and essentially what we did to turn infrastructure as a service into a PaaS for us that worked. So first up, why is it that we need to transform IT? And I'm going to caveat this, that these are the challenges that we face in IT, but I want to put that wrap around it as talented IT people, right? I could find anybody who could do Linux or Windows, but getting someone who could go through and recompile that kernel and harden it for security purposes, that's a whole different ballgame. So this is a lot of the challenges that we actually face as well, is finding those talented people within IT. And then once we get them, how do we make them productive, keep them entertained, give them those challenging assignments, and just make sure that we don't lose those people. All the way down to the bottom one here, which is we had some very tech-savvy developers. I worked with 28 developers from different game studios, and some of them really knew their stuff, and other ones were just like, yeah, hey, just give me something I can code on, right? But we had some very tech-savvy ones, and this just helps me build my case for why we need to start adopting cloud. This comes from a VMware vArchitect. And basically what he explains is, hey, if you look at this VMware way of doing things, it's a backward-facing model. It worked, it was great, but the future is really these cloud technologies that are out there now. And, they're more of the forward, open cloud or rather OpenStack and AWS is that forward-leaning way of doing things. And then when we move from why now we've justified our cloud, well, let's justify hybrid cloud. Right, and this is not news to anybody. Gartner put it up there. They said that you can't just adopt cloud. We have to take hybrid now. It's the future paradigm shift. It's where we're going. Forrester kind of progresses that thought a little bit more and says it's not just about hybrid cloud. You really have to give a damn about the application, right? If you're not looking at your IT from the application perspective, then there's something that you're missing in how you're doing IT. My opinion, and then. Just to give you guys some perspective again on how we view the world, go back 15 years ago, right? What was it that you heard from all the IT people? I didn't go and get a computer science degree so that I can learn about electricity and voltage and run my data center. I wanted to get out of that business. It's not my core competency. And what's IT trying to drive towards today is not I got a computer science degree so that I could do that. Well, it's the same concept with cloud and with the hybrid cloud and working with developers. I didn't go into IT so that I can just configure IP tables all day, right? I went into IT so I could help solve business challenges. And a lot of people in IT kind of tackle it from that perspective today. So we take it from the same way of looking at it, that when you do look at the applications, focus on the apps. Don't worry about the underlying infrastructure. There's open source code to run that. Focus on helping your your producers, your developers get those applications out there. If you do that, then you're going to have, obviously, and I'll back this up with some numbers later that I used for my business case to our C-level and board of directors, right? But you can see more profits, and doing what we've all been doing since 2006, I got to keep decreasing my IT budget, right? So I can actually play in the world and meet those metrics. So let's talk about first what the developers wanted. This comes from me pulling my developers. When I went out to them and said, guys, you're my coders, you're writing games for us, all these apps, what do you want? They said, we want cloud to do everything. We want that magical, mystical unicorn in the cloud, right? And they gave me this whole list that looks something like that, right? And I said, wow, okay, this is great. You want portability, you want agility, you want me to learn Scrum? I'll learn Scrum, no problem. We can go out and get on board with that. And I want some platform that you're going to give me that has well-defined SDKs. I want APIs that I could easily do my calls against, and this is what I want. And we said, okay, great. Well, since I've been at Rackspace, I've been collecting more metrics, right? Hey, Rackspace customers, what do you want? And this is what they're telling us from the developer side. Well, I have unpredictable workloads. I don't know what I'm going to see. I just like to code. I want to focus on what I'm good at, and I want a platform that's just going to let me code. We'll kind of get into that whole perception of dev test environments a little bit later on and how volatile they can get. But this is really, when we talk with developers and you distill it down, they come at us with, I got all these great ideas. This is why people leave companies, right? Hey, IBM, I got this good idea. Yeah, we're selling mainframes. So what do? They go off and start their own company. If you look especially out here in this industry, the Silicon Valley, I'm sure we could throw a rock and hit somebody who can tell you, well, I tried this at my company. They didn't want to do it, so I started my own multi-million-dollar business. So this is what developers are telling us. I want to have ideas. I want to create. I just want to go. Now let's look at it from the IT perspective, right? What do we want in IT? Well, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, this is how we want it, right? This is what we're used to. We've just got done going through and adhering to ITIL. We've set up our SOA architectures. We're adhering to COBIT. I've just passed all my SSAE16 certifications, and I've got security, and I finally got my head around it, and I want all this stuff to just stay the hell the way it is because I don't want to change. This is my world. This is what I'm used to. And I've gone out and put together all these tools to help me capture the network, and I understand what's going on. If there's a problem, man, we could troubleshoot that thing so quick it'd make your head spin, right? And this is really what IT wants. And not all IT people, but as we go out and talk to our customers, they won't admit to it until we ask them point blank, "Is this what you want?" They go, "Well, yeah, kind of. That's what I want," right? If I distill it down to their same bullet points, they want to focus on security. They want to focus on disaster recovery and backups. I got to do monitoring. I got to give all this uptime. I want all this stuff, and none of it matches what my developers want whatsoever, right? But this is how IT views the world today. I want to control my resources. And then we have where IT should really be focusing today, right? The vision. What should IT be looking at? They need to become a service provider that empowers people. They want to become that enabler within the organization. Within our company, we decided to take a different approach. We went and sat down with accounting and watched how they did things and said, okay, now that we've seen you do this process 1,000 times and it takes you a week to get through it, watch us automate it for you and it'll get done within 5 minutes. And they just couldn't wrap their heads around that, and so they told us, no, I'm happy doing it with my weekly long process. It was a real fun experiment for us. But our goal in IT is really, if we're doing it right, to become advisors to the business. So let's find the balance in all of this, right? How many of you guys have seen this one, right? Well, it worked fine in dev. I don't know why it's not working in production. And what's always the common reason? Hardware mismatch, configuration issues. I give a developer a server to work on. He installed some patches that he didn't tell me about, and I have to figure out what that is, right? It's a common problem. Well, at least it was for us. So we sat down and said, again, how do I work with my developers? How do I get my guys and our head into their world? And this is what we did. We sat down hit every 28 of our developers, and that's the companies. There's at least 4 to 50 people within each of those companies that we talk to, and we distilled it down to this: they want to code, they want to package that code, right? They want to deploy the code, and after they deploy it, we have the QA and we do the verification and all the security stuff that surrounds it, and it's a cycle for them. I want to do it this way, right? And so, okay, well, how do we enable them to do that? Well, I'll get into that when I get to my 5th section about how we got there. But, while they're telling us this is what we want to do, this is our dilemma in IT. As I talk to them and say, how popular will this application be? They look at me and go, I don't know. Well, how many users do you think are going to use it? Somewhere between 100 and 10,000, we think. And I'm going, okay, well, this is wonderful, guys. Thanks for that. I will, you're running that load on a dev server, and so I guess I'll go buy 10 of these and hope that that's what is, right? And what do we see? That standard curve. It comes up, users spike. We had that with our games. We expected as every game went out that we'd keep a user for 6 months, right? You guys play your mobile games on your phones? That's what we saw. If we were lucky, we kept them for 6 months. Usually it was 2 to 4 months, and then away they go, right? And so we have to keep putting out new games, the Zynga model, in order to keep those users playing our games. And so we have this problem right here, where we anticipate this launch demand, and we buy for all this stuff for it, and because we're in IT and no one wants to lose their job because we didn't plan properly, we buy a little bit extra more, which goes back to the developer's budget. And they're, hey, guys, this shouldn't cost more than $50,000. Well, here's your bill for $200,000. It kind of, we get that disparity and more of that thing. And then at the end of it, I have unused capacity. So I take those servers and I say, for the next developer coming in, here's your server to develop on. Yeah, it's a year or 2 old, but go ahead and develop on it. When you go to production, I'll put you on the newest, latest, and greatest. Don't worry about it. And I got that hardware mismatch, driver mismatch, code mismatch, and I go back to that earlier problem that I had, right? So how do we approach this? Well, this is where adopting those hybrid clouds came to us. And jumping back to that slide, I'll never forget the first time I gave a developer my bill and said, here's what your IT resources have cost. He says, there's got to be some mistake. And I said, no, I've checked the numbers like 5 times. He goes, this is way too low. There's got to be some mistake. And I'm just like, oh, well, if that's your problem, no, that's your bill. Don't worry. I'll put it in an email. I'll cover your ass on this one, right? So, and the way we got there was following this concept. Own your base, rent your spike. From the hybrid cloud perspective, it looks a little bit like this. I have my peak. I'm going to have my own private cloud, right? I know that that's my consistent workload. When it came to my applications in the cloud or my MMOs, I could pretty much predict my workload. When I talked about my business apps, I can usually predict my workload. But when you're talking about these mobile games, right, where I'm going to have my first users jump in, especially when Apple decides to make you a premier game, which has happened to us a couple times, that spike really shoots up. And, then people, they lose interest and they go on to the next one. So what do I do when I spike? I rent it. I just put it right out in there in the public cloud because I've got stateless apps. And I set up my global load balancing properly. And when that comes down, I destroy the servers. And that's why that first developer who said this has got to be wrong, I looked at him, I said, no, you got to understand. I'm not taking servers that I'm amortizing over 3 years and charging it back to you. I'm just taking you what I use, charging you back to you. More royalties to him. I had some very happy developers when they got their royalties from us, right? Another way of saying that, and this will be made available if anybody wants a slide afterwards, I can just say it because it's a bit of an eyesore. But when you look at your workloads, you say, well, what belongs where, right? What belongs on an on-premise data center versus what belongs in a public cloud. And this is kind of one of those things that we put over to help people understand. If I want more control over my application, yeah, I'm going to keep it on my legacy VMware stuff. I had a lot of applications that I just never bothered to put in the cloud because it made no sense. I needed my security and my audits and my SSA 16s and PCI compliances. But when I wanted that agility, that ability to spike, then I started using cloud technologies, right? So how did we make it all work? Well, I like this quote. As Henry Ford said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have told me they wanted faster horses, right? And we really had to change the mind shift of people, right? Henry Ford had to come in and say, here's a better way of doing things. So we had to sell a business unit on it, which meant a C-level and the board of directors. I had managers to sell on it, and I had a lot of producers. I don't know if you guys have worked in the entertainment industry, but when you try to tell a producer who's very well known, this is how we're going to change things, you get a lot of swearing, a lot of F-bombs, followed up with, and you'll never work in this town again, right? And that's pretty much about how our conversation went, along with a lot of threats. And but we decided, you know what? You don't need faster horses. You need a better way of doing things. And so when I went and talked with them and my executive management, I try to make them understand, look, you guys have wrapped your head around virtualization. It's a great technology. It's a good way of doing things, but cloud computing is a business model. This is a business enabler, right? So I had to get it into their heads that this is not just another technology. Hybrid cloud and public cloud and everything that has to do with cloud, it's not just something you put on your iPad and you get it off your iMac later on, right? It's not just a syncing platform as the cloud. We had to kind of demystify it for them, right? And make them understand it's a business enabling technology. And then, because they're business guys, we gave them the real numbers, right? Okay, well, let's come up with a hypothetical situation. Today, the way we develop applications takes this long because how does it go? The developers call us up in IT and says, I'm going to spin up an application. I do my budget analysis for them. You'll need 5 servers. You'll need this much storage. I'll need to buy this network gear. Here you go. Here's your cost. It's $100,000. And by the way, because I got to bring in my storage engineer, my network engineer, and an OS guy, and then install these patches, it's going to be about 4 months before you're ready to start developing even. Right? And versus, hey, what if I already have all this infrastructure laid out? What if I just click? My developer literally just logs in and pushes a button, and there's his Windows instance or his Linux instance, and we could set up deployments, whole LAMP stacks for them if they want. That'll just auto-deploy everything. For what they just click it. And instead of them having to wait and go through meetings and hour-long meetings where we talk about objectives and requirements, what if they just click a button, and there it is? And my producers, they said that'll just never happen. And my developers said, well, you're just pie in the sky, man, right? But what if, right? What if we could just do all that? And so we put this to our executives. If we do that, we get that extra time, right? We get that 4 months back. That's 4 months that we're going to be out to release. So we're faster to the market. We're less expensive because I don't have to go out and plan for my overcommit. I don't have to say, well, I thought you needed 2 cores, but I'm going to buy 6 cores because I don't want to lose my job, right? I take that out of there. So I actually start using what I actually need versus what I'm afraid might happen. And, I use less, right? I can turn these servers on and off. I can repurpose them. Within private cloud, I have this concept of multi-tenancy. So I can overcommit. I can give this guy, my developer A, 10 cores. I can give developer B 20 cores and developer C 80 cores. At the end of the day, I might only have 50 cores to give, but I've overcommitted. And I can watch those workloads and start saying, wow, look at this. These guys are all really starting to bang it. I need to add another node to my compute node. Here comes another Nova node, up we go. And they wouldn't know, but it helps me plan my budget. So at the end of the day, I'm keeping costs lower. How does that work out? I told you I'd back this up. Well, instead of, making 1.7 million off that release, I'm going to make 2.3 million. And in our case, we got lucky. Apple and Google both premiered our applications quite a number of times, so those revenue numbers really went up, right? We had very, very happy management that we're glad they took a risk. But it requires a change in mindset. So I had to now go and convince some of my peers in my IT group that we have to change in how we do things. And I love this example. And you know what? If you're from San Francisco, I apologize because I find that hopefully nobody's here from PETA. but we changed the way we do things, right? When I first got into computers, all my servers were named after Star Wars or Marvel comic book characters, and I knew every one of those servers by name. I knew everything that was on them. I knew how they interacted, and they were my servers. I could go to my data center and hug those. I love those servers, right? And they were my pets, and that's so if something broke in our traditional computer, well, what did we do? We'd go hug the server, we'd go through logs and figure out what went wrong, and oh no, Han Solo's down, at least Chewie's still up, let's and we get Han back into production, get him going the way he should. Well, CERN has told us no. With cloud, that's not the way it is, man. Computers are like cattle. You don't name them, you give them an ID, and if they break, boom, you shoot them in the head. Get a new cow, right? And so let's adopt this methodology. Instead of care and feeding our servers, we'll shoot them in the head. And the first success story came for me when it was probably about 3 o'clock in the morning. And I got a phone call from one of my producers because they insisted on getting monitoring alerts. And I said, "Hey, Ryan, how you doing?" Kind of groggy. He probably thought I was hungover. And he says, "Matt, there's a problem with the server. You got to fix it now." And I said, "Oh, Ryan, it'll fix itself, man." And he goes, "No, it's down. It'll fix itself." Ryan, who the hell's even playing at 3 in the morning? That's like our no. I'm going back to because fix it now, and more f-bombs drop and threats, and so I'm like, all right, yeah, I'll fix your server. So I set my phone down on the side of the bed and went back to sleep for about 30 minutes. Picked up the phone. He'd been patiently waiting the whole time. Said, "Ryan, I fixed it." And he says, "You sure?" And I said, "Totally, it's fixed, don't worry." And I'm one of those early guys. I get to the office at 6, he gets in at 11. So I had 5 hours to prepare for the ire of Ryan, our executive producer. And he comes in and he nicely says, "So what did you do to fix it? What was wrong?" I said, "Oh, Ryan, I put my phone down on the side of the bed and I went back to sleep." And, I said, "So you want to know what I did to fix it?" I used cloud technology. Like I told you I was going to do. I set up all these monitoring tools in advance. I set up, I can't say I had a whole team of people, some very smart people on my team as well. We actually sat down and wrote monitoring scripts, and we wrote automation, and we wrote rules that say, if this, then do that. And we learned how to hook into our cloud providers' APIs. And, I shouldn't say this because I'm from Rackspace, but I did use joined in AWS and Rackspace, right? I learned how to use all their APIs and how to make it so that when we had to boot those servers, we could make whatever we lost look exactly like what we had before. We got a new cow and added it to the load balancer pool, and off we went. So it's this great concept that worked really well for us, right? Well, how did we get there? So for us, we had to sit down as a company. We had to talk to our developers and our producers and say, let's look at our average gaming site, right? So if you guys sit there and say, what's the average mobile game look like? Well, this is it. Right, I have my clients out there, I have player matching services I have to go in through, and then I got all my IT stuff here, security, firewalls, all that fun stuff that we care about in IT. Developers don't care about that. They care about the stuff back here, mapping and coordination and the access control players. And then, by the way, let's layer social technographics on it because we got to capture who's playing what game and all sorts of business analytics that I didn't put in there. Didn't even think of that, right? We started with something real basic, and this is what we started with. Well, this is what we look like. So now let's start defining how we're going to build our cloud portfolio for it. And we came up with this, which I look at now and say, wow, that makes no sense whatsoever. Some of the components we kept, some of it we used SVN, we used Git, we used Capistrano, Maven, all that fun stuff to help us define our infrastructure. But we decided we're going to try this DevOps thing, right? Because we'd read about it, and that's supposed to bridge IT with operations. So let's give it a shot. And so to start, we said, well, first we'll need a cloud platform. And mind you, this goes 2-3 years back. So this is exactly what we did. We went to Google, straight to Google, and said, let's Google Cloud Platform and see what comes up, right? Because we couldn't justify putting everything out in a public cloud, because what's the gaming company's most valuable asset? It's intellectual property, right? We can't put that IP out there for someone to just have full access to. So for us, private hybrid had to make more of a sense. So let's look at the 3 top ones. So we found Eucalyptus, CloudStack, and Openstack. Didn't know anything about any of them, but hey, Google will tell us who's the most popular, and we want to use the most popular one, right? So hey, OpenStack showed up. Let's go take a look at that. And by the way, we looked at other things like vBlock, and from the VMware EMC Cisco alliance. We looked at HP Matrix. We looked at a lot of stuff. But at the end of the day, we said, let's do something new. We looked at who's looking at this, because we got to hire someone to probably help run this cloud, or we got to learn it. So let's look at where the talent is. We're in California. There's a lot of people in California, all of them. Okay, well, that doesn't help us. Well, let's look at the job postings, right? Because if you go out there and look at and I updated this just a couple months ago, the numbers are really about the same. Or rather, the distribution's about the same. The numbers are a lot higher for the CloudStack one, so we said let's figure out what's popular. But OpenStack was still at its infancy for us, and it had network issues. And we're looking at this, going, well, let's take a bet on it. Fortunately for us, about a year and a half after we made this decision, IBM, HP, Red Hat, everyone jumped on the OpenStack bandwagon. So for us, it was vindication. For back then, it was a risk. Now it's kind of a no-brainer, right? And just to give you, if you've not familiar with it, this was our cloud platform. It's basically just a way of setting up compute nodes, memory or storage nodes, and then a common networking layer amongst them, right, on different hypervisors. In a nutshell, and I'm not going to bore you to death by reading this, but it's essentially just a setup of different projects that help you with the storage. So if you're one of those guys who has to have that NFS mount, and storage like I was, because I was a big NetApp and EMC fan, then you're going to love the Cinder project, right? If you're one of those guys who just wants to deal with objects because you're a developer, and I just want to make an API call, I want to dump my data somewhere, then hey, this is your platform. You get Swift and away you go. But at the end of the day, we're all running on the Nova compute. And then for me, because I'm running a business, I got to go back to all these developers and give them their royalties. I need to be able to meter it, right? So we had things like Salometer, and Heat didn't exist back then. But now it goes back to that deployments. If you're very good with Chef or Puppet, that's one thing. There's other tools out there like Instradius and RightScale, but that will let you do a full LAMP stack deployment. But with Heat now, we could do that just by default within the OpenStack. So put that in there. So now let's talk about the databases that we looked at, right? Because we figured out our compute platform, and this is how we attack databases. Let's go look at just who's the most popular database. Well, there's Oracle, and trust me, I was paying enough Oracle licenses. There's no way in hell I was putting another mobile app on Oracle. They were painful enough as it was. And we looked at MySQL, Microsoft SQL, and all these, and say, hey, look, that MySQL's up there on the list. Let's just go with MySQL. And so we went with MySQL because it was popular. It was a really dumb idea for picking a database, especially because we saw this, right? Hey, look at that. They all overlap anyway, right? So if I need bad, chances are relational database meets our needs. Life is good. And it was really, really just the dumbest way to pick a database. And we learned that the hard way, right? Because as soon as you start getting all sorts of things. So as we got smarter, we learned about CAP theorem. Are you guys familiar with CAP theorem in here? Best way to pick a database, right? Basically, CAP theorem says that I have three different things I can, with the database, pick two of the three. I could either be available to my people, I could be consistent, or I could be partitionable, but I can't be all three. And there's been plenty of people who've tried to disprove it, but no one's succeeded so far. So, and what we did, though, is this goes back to profiling how our games are going to work. And we said, oh, we're going to have matchmaking, right? So we need to be highly consistent in our matchmaking. All those players have to talk to each other. Data has to be accurate. And I have to be all over the place. So I have to be partitionable, tolerance, availability. If I'm not available for a microsecond or 2 seconds, I can live with that because users are going to wait that half second for that matchmaking to happen. So I go, okay, so I got to be consistent and partitionable. Oh, Redis, that makes a lot of sense to me. Or, maybe Mongo. We did a lot with Memcache as well. And Mongo. So if you guys aren't familiar with CAP theorem and you're saying, I need to start getting to cloud databases and the way to do it, this is the best way to start right here. This is the cheat sheet. Man, it took us 6 months to figure this part out alone. Wish someone had given that to me. And then after we get the database, we say now we have to automate it, right? What's the use in doing any type of cloud technologies, any cloud technology like OpenStack if you can't automate it? We were sysadmins, so what did we naturally go to? Puppet, right? I've heard many times from people, sysadmins no Puppet, and so that's where we started. We had every vendor that walked in our door would say, "Hey, what do you use for your automation?" And do you use Puppet or Chef? Because that was kind of all there was back then. And you'd see them like that deer in the headlight, Chef? Like they flipped the coin in their head and said, "Did I answer right?" And we go, "Oh, okay, cool, Chef, that's awesome." And they're hoping that they answered the question right. And we just wanted to know what they were using, right? Now you have more out there when it comes to the automation layer. You have Ansible, which will let you do all deployments as well. Salt. So there's a little bit more to look at when you're doing all that. So as you guys are adopting these cloud strategies, start figuring out what works best for you, right? All of them are going to work with the OpenStack layer. It doesn't matter. Docker, if you're into containerization, which again wasn't somewhere that we played with in Stratius, which was in Stratus at the time before Dell bought them. We played with RightScale. We really liked RightScale a lot. That kind of came at the end of our platform curve. But when you guys are looking at ways to just make your life in IT or even your developers' lives easy, this is definitely the type of tools you're going to want to look at. Right, and then after that, New Relic, because we had to monitor everything, right? So we started with Nagios and Graphite because it was free, and we weren't making money. And at the time, we had to pay for New Relic. Then we started saying, well, let's look at what New Relic can do. So we started graphing those game cycles, and we knew when to spin servers up, when to spin servers down. We had a rule, hard and fast. Any application that went live automatically got 5 cloud servers. Period, end of story. They were 2 vCPU and 8 gig servers, and off they go by default. Then we let New Relic do the rest for us, right? So New Relic would come in and say, hey, I'm not really looking at a lot of load across these 5. Why don't we kill off 3? And so, okay, well, let's kill off 3 because we only need 2. So it helps you put that business intelligence back into running your applications, which gets to my final slide here, right? You have to own your business. Right, you have to know what's going along those apps. For our perspective, boy, that really came out bad. I apologize. Right, we had to look at those real-time assessments. We had to provide that analytics back. And by the way, I had Oracle Analytics running on the back and Tableau and a lot of other things. But for those of us here in IT, right, we really wanted to look at our servers, right? Do I shoot that cow or not? Did the cow die and do I got to buy a new one? And who's performing and who's not? And then the final thing is really just knowing to pull the plug when you're developing these apps, right? That's where these metrics come into. We had a concept, we call it fail fast, right? So let's let our developers have all the ideas they want. They can funnel it in, they can click that button, and they can have those applications out there real quick and let them run nuts. Right? What's it going to cost our company? 20, 30,000 over the next 6, 7 months. If it's successful, we're going to make a ton of money. Our lowest game, we made $25,000 a month off of 2,000 users, right? And it costs us $3,000 a month to run. It's highly profitable. Why not let the developers have their way? Get those ideas out there, enable them with our tool sets to get them to do it. And if we're monitoring and they're just not doing it right, shoot it. Fail fast, pull the plug, right? So any questions at all for anybody? Shoot.
So, I don't think you made it clear. What did you end up going with for your configuration management?
So what did we use for our configuration management? So it's different in the cloud world, right? So everything was OpenStack, and then we'd predefine our images on that. And that we let that run basically through deployment, and then Puppet did all of the deployments for us when it came to installing the application, talking to the Git repo, and then we also used Jenkins quite heavily, which is probably what you were wondering. You're right, I didn't put that in there, but we relied very heavily on Jenkins as our butler service, if you will. So,
And then just to follow up,
sure.
so how did you work with developers to communicate changes that they need to make to the server configuration or the application?
So That was really, that's a very good question. I know I didn't touch on it. So the question is, how did we work with the developers, right? And so you guys aren't looking at my back here. What we did was we basically, because we had all this automation that was running the hardware for us, it became more of me and my guys talking to the developers. So they would email me, I need this schema change in the database, and we would update the database. This is kind of why we said let's get away from from MySQL so that they could have Mongo and do their own schema updates, right? But a lot of it was they would call us, they would email us, tell us what they want. We'd sit in through some of their meetings if they're local. We had a lot in Canada and Sweden and Australia, so that wasn't always ideal. But most of it, they got to do whatever they want. We had kind of turned this into a platform. If they picked, if they everyone either did Linux or Windows, right? So if they're a .NET developer, those window agents were predefined. It had all our monitoring agents into it. It had all our security sniffing tools that we built into it, right? And so there was really not much for them to do. If they did a patch, if they want, hey, I need to install this package or what have you, then they would notify us, I need to have this package updated. We built it into the recipe, and then when the manifest did its 5-minute update, it would go through, compare, and just deploy. So it was just really a quick request for them. Our turnaround time was usually about 10 to 15 minutes because we took this attitude now of we're just here to give the developers what they want. And it really worked out for us well because whatever they did in development, when we had to spin up those QA servers, right, all the configurations were equal. There was no package drift. There was, none of those problems we had. And when we went into production, same thing. So all three of our environments were exactly the same because we had this underlying cloud abstraction layer that took, the issues with drivers and BIOSes and all that out of the mix. CloudStack, sorry. Boy, I'm going to get shot by my company for that. Openstack for us was really what made a lot of that possible, frankly speaking. Any other questions?
Possibly use New Relic for elastic scaling? Is that
Okay, so that's what we were looking at, right? Because again, I'm going to get shot by my company. The New Relic was brought to us by Joint, right, at the time. And so we kind of got into it, might have been 2011 or the start of 2012. And kind of a lot of those features that you see now weren't there. It was more of just a monitoring tool for us. So nowadays, would I consider it? Absolutely. But back then, really wasn't on the table as an option. So. And for those who asked, I'm sorry, the question was, would I have considered New Relic for my scaling and automation tool to kind of help me with that logic? But yeah, I would now, absolutely. So thank you, it's a good question. Anyone else? If not, we're right on time. So I thank you guys for taking time to come and attend. I really appreciate it.